it's our privilege to have you here. Please take a moment to fill out the connection card in the pew rack in front of you. This is our tool for you to use to let us know what ministries you'd like to know more about, and for you to let us know how we can pray for you. You can drop it in the offering bucket when it's passed, or leave it on the pew if you need more time. Ushers, you can now pass the offering buckets. Please know that we are so honored that you give to what God is doing at Westside Church. And we're going to work hard to leverage your gift wisely in our mission here at Westside Church and around the world. Thank you.
Aren't you grateful for the grace of God? Amen. It's because of His grace that we're here this morning, to be able to be in this worship experience and experience all that God has for us. God is in this place this morning in a very real way. And it's a joy to have with us Gary Gerstenberger and his wife Renee from Kankakee, Illinois. Gary has been in ministry for 25, 35 years, something like that. And I know 27, I believe, as a youth pastor, ministry to families and youth. And 17 of those years was right here at Westside Church. And many of you know him. And it's a joy to have Pastor Gary and Renee with us today. Would you give them a great Westside welcome as he comes and shares God's word with us this morning?
Well, it kind of threw me off. I'm used to walking up through here, and that wasn't happening today. It is good to be with you today, and I count it a privilege to stand in this pulpit. Appreciate Pastor Dave contacting me and asking me to come and to speak today so he could get away on vacation. And that's a good time for rest and important to do. And so we're glad that he gave us the call to be here today. For some of you that may be new to the congregation in the last 4 years, congratulations. Westside is a great family, and I'm sure you have found that as you've come into this congregation. And for those who don't know, my wife and I raised our boys basically at this church. Jordan came here, and he was in 3rd grade. And Jeffrey was almost 2 years old and ready for the child care center. So in that 17 years, our boys have grown up quite a bit. And so I have a picture to give you an update that's a part of the PowerPoint. This is where they're at now in life. Jordan just graduated from Olivet with his master's, his MBA, and is the director of recruitment for Olivet in the admissions center, and has been doing that for the last year or so in that role. And he and his wife, Katie, are resident directors in some of the apartments at Olivet. And then Jeff just graduated from college. So the last 4 years of our lives have been very quick as they passed by. He began as a psychology major and added sociology to that. And then he found social work. And so he worked hard and graduated with the equivalent of 3 degrees and is going to be getting his master's at the University of Illinois this fall in hospital administration. So I just thought that would be a nice thing to kind of share with you who have known them and seen them since they were little, helped invest in their lives as a part of this church, and I thank you for that as you have been a part of their lives for many years. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about some things. Everybody goes through things in their lives, times in their lives where they go through transition and things that are going to come next. Every one of us that's in this room today, there are next steps in our life, in our journey. So throughout history, man has gone through the process of seeking God, looking for God, finding God's will for his life. You think about Noah and Abraham and Moses and even the disciples of the New Testament. They had no idea what God wanted to do in their lives. And so if you think about that for a minute, we have the Bible to know what happened in their lives, and they were taking steps of faith. So just kind of a little bit of review. First of all, you think of Noah. He's going to be asked, first God tells him that he's going to flood the world, and he's going to build an ark. What's a flood, and what's an ark? All right? Can't get any more stretched out than what God is telling him he's going to do in his life. We think about Abraham, who was advanced in age and believed he and his Sarai, his wife, could not have children. But God said, you're going to have the stars of the sky to count for your descendants. We think about Moses and how God said, I want you to go back and free the people. And the people in Egypt, it's been 40 years since he's been gone, and he left as a murderer, all right? Not something you really want to go back to and try to maneuver and to see something happen, but God had that in store for him. And then we think about the disciples. When Jesus called the disciples, they had no idea what it was all going to be about. And so as we look at that, and we know that God has plans for our lives, he has next steps, he has new journeys, no matter where we're at in our journey with him at this point. Life with God. He has incredible plans for you, and he's just waiting to reveal those to you as you walk with him and as you follow him. So I want to give you a little bit of background to our text today. We're going to be looking at 1 Samuel 16, and to just kind of understand what happens in 1 Samuel, it's a story of how Samuel will go and anoint David to be the next king. But to understand before what's happened is helpful for us to kind of see how God is working. So first of all, the tribe of Levi was the tribe that God had ordained as the priests. Their role would be to lead the people. They were the priests. They were the ones to care for the sacrifices. They're the ones that did all of that. So we see at the beginning of 1 Samuel where Samuel as a child is dedicated to the Lord, and in this process then is given back to the temple and is raised there by Eli, and it becomes a priest because you see Eli's sons, these Levite sons, were evil and taking advantage of people. So Samuel's going to come in and save the day. So Samuel reigns, and now his sons are priests. And now his sons are doing like Eli's sons. And Samuel's getting further along in age. So the people of Israel say, well, we want a king like everybody else. So God says, okay, we're going to give you a king. So Saul becomes the king. Saul was seeking God. Then Saul wasn't seeking God. So you've got young priests doing whatever they please. You've got a king not serving God. And God will only go so long, and then he goes, it's time to change some things up. And so in this process, this history of how we get to this setting of where David is going to be called is very interesting. Because Samuel, even though he has faith and he knows God needs to move, he's got a lot of things that he's trying to process himself. So if you'll look with me today, 1 Samuel 16, I'll be reading verses 1 through 13. And then there's 4 key areas we're going to look at as we work through the text and go back and see what Samuel's experiences are all about. 1 Samuel 16, verse 1. The Lord said to Samuel, how long will you mourn for Saul, since I've rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I have chosen one of his sons to be king. But Samuel said, how can I go? Saul will hear about it and kill me. The Lord said, take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me one that I indicate. Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, do you come in peace? Samuel replied, yes, I come in peace. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me. Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, and he thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. Then the Lord does not look on the things that men look at. Men looks at the outward appearances, but God looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass by Samuel. But Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse then sent Shammah, pass by. But Samuel said, nor has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had 7 sons, and his sons passed before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, are these all of your sons? They're still the youngest, Jesse answered, but he is tending sheep. Samuel said, send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. So he was sent for, was brought in. He was ruddy with fine appearances and handsome features. Then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. He is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil, anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came on David in power. Samuel then went to Ramah. It's interesting the steps and the process that Samuel's going through. He's showing up and dealing with all these factors and trying to figure out what it is that God has. So there are 4 things we're going to look at today. We're going to look at the fact that there are 4 things involved with finding God's will, finding his direction, as big or small as the situation might be. There is basically a plan that God has. There's direction that God has. There's a voice coming from God. And then eventually there's a peace that comes in the midst of making these kinds of decisions. Now, all of us are a little bit different when it comes to how we process life. I have in my hand here 2 owner's manuals. Owner's manuals are those things that were created by the person who has a product. We buy the product, and then we get this booklet with all the steps to put together this item, all right? So I've got my Craftsman miter saw, and I've got my charcoal grill. Now, the first thing about charcoal grill, I assembled those in high school in a hardware store. So I buy mine assembled, all right? So don't even really need this instruction manual. But I've got it, just in case I need to know something. And then my Craftsman saw, I've used it to build a deck, but I still haven't read it. It was assembled too. So the process of these warranties that we get with the things that we buy is to walk us through step by step. And there are people who will read every step of the process. And they want to know step by step, what do I do next? Well, where's number 7 screw? Because I can't do this without that, all right? There's those individuals. And then there are the people that tear the bag open and dump the screws on the table and go, okay, this looks like it's the right length, all right? You're going to fit somewhere in between. Now, some would say I would follow this to a T if you've ever worked with me. Not necessarily the case. I will sometimes only go through the step by step if I think I can screw it up. If it's something I've done before, Byron Rector taught me how to do a ceiling fan. I was always afraid I'd burn the house down. But once I learned how to do a ceiling fan, I was checking those things out, and it was no big deal, and I didn't need the instructions, I thought. But for the most part, we live in a world where we have instructions and guides and ways to process and work through the kind of things that we need to do. God has steps and processes. Whether we're looking for them or not, he's got a plan to walk us through our lives. So the first thing we see is God's plan. The first 3 verses there in 1 Samuel 16 is kind of the answer everybody would love to have. When we're processing something in life, God says to Samuel, you're going to go over here, see this family, and you're going to pick the next king. Most of us would love to have that kind of instruction, but what does Samuel do? He pulls back. He's nervous. All he's thinking about is what's going to happen to him because he knows Saul, and Saul's not following God at the time, and he could be evil, and he could be upset. And so all these things are going through. Fear can cause us to not follow God's plan. We don't even know what could happen, but something might happen. And so this is the struggle that Samuel's going through. When we begin to take control of our lives, we stop the planning process that God has. He's got this plan. He wants to walk us through it. But we're holding back because we're afraid. I had the blessing of being raised in a Christian home. My parents, my grandparents, and my great-grandparents were part of the Church of the Nazarene, all serving as laymen all through my life. I remember the stories of what they had done and what they've been involved with. And so I had the blessing of hearing these stories and walking and finding and searching out for God as a child. I had no idea then at age 12 that when God said at a youth camp, I want all of you, and I surrendered what he had in store for my life. I saw my dad, who was an usher, and my grandpa. I saw my other grandpa, who was a Sunday school teacher, and I saw all these things. I thought, I'll probably be doing something like that. So in this process, not knowing what God was going to do in my life, not knowing where he was going to take me, it was kind of exciting to say, okay, God, I'm in. It's not like a lot of threat when I think it's going to be something I recognize and something I can process. So that I remember in high school, as I'm trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do, I'm working in a hardware store, and so I liked numbers, and I thought accounting might be something I'm interested in, business and accounting. So one day, as a junior in high school, I went to a little thing called Red Carpet Days at Olivet Nazarene College in those days, and I, in that process, said, I'm coming here. This is where I'm supposed to be. And it's interesting because I believe God said to me, you're supposed to be here. He just didn't add the accounting and the business part of it. So God directs our steps, even though we don't realize what he wants to walk us through. So in that process, step by step, faith in faith, I just pursued, finished high school, went there, and said, this is where God has me. This is important. God has a plan for our lives, and he wants to reveal it to us. He has a plan, and he wants to reveal it to us. Now, finding God's will for your life is not something just for high school students, college students. In your life, there are decisions you're going to make. For some of you, you have small children, and you're trying to decide, do we homeschool or go to Christian school or do we go to public school? For some of you, you're an empty nester, all right? So Renee and I were empty nesters for the first time. Now, both of our sons lived a quarter of a mile away, but we were still empty nest. It was a transition in our lives. We said, where are we at? God, what do we do with our lives? I know someday I'm going to come to a point where I've got to decide, what am I going to do at retirement? Every stage, no matter where you're at, you might be in a job right now and you're like, is this it till I can retire? God may have a different plan. We get in a routine, and he wants to say to us, maybe I have something for you more, or maybe I can be more of a blessing in where you are, and you are where you're supposed to be. So no matter where we're at, he's got a plan. The other thing that God has for us is he has a direction. So there's this plan out here, and then there's direction of where he wants to become a little bit more specific. In verses 4 to 6, he's very specific with Samuel. He says, okay, you're going to go here, Jesse, they're going to march across, and it's going to be, who is it going to be? All right? So there's a specific direction God wants to take us. He was looking at the earthly things. Sometimes God allows things to cross our paths that he really has no interest in us taking advantage of, because he's relying on us to rely on him and not just go, if you're looking for a house. I have a friend right now who works with me in Olivet. They're trying to buy a house. They'll walk into a house, they say, oh yeah, we want it, and they say, well, we got an offer already. And he's just going through this process where they don't know what house to buy. Either it gets swooped up and they can't get it, someone has already bought it, or they say it's too out of their range. And I said to him the other day, I said, he's got the house for you. He's just waiting to see if you're going to trust him enough to give you the right one. And so even those kind of decisions in our lives, he wants to give us direction. So as we walk along and we think about things like, wouldn't it be great if there was like an app that would just say, okay, plug in, what's my plan for 2017, 2018? Well, we kind of do. It's called the Bible. I mean, as you seek and as you pray, he's going to reveal to you just as easily as someone who can tell you an answer. So walking with God, looking for his direction in our lives, it's a step-by-step. It's a constant trust for the next day, for the next step, for the next situation. When I was at Olivet, I believe he had called me there to be a good layman. I'm going to take a class or two on youth ministry because I need to be prepared to be a good layman like my family has been and help with the youth group. And that's how God kind of did it. He didn't just hit me with it right off all at once because I would have ran. But he said, how about this? It was like the next step. So as I'm taking these classes, then God's starting to say, why don't you take some more? Why don't you just change majors? And that process, I never would have just dreamed that this is what God's going to do with me. I had to let him walk me through. The more time I spent seeking God, the more I understood where he was at and what he was trying to do in my life. There will be steps of faith we need to take on our journey, steps that we don't understand, but we just do it because God has said to do it. And we sense his peace in that situation. So, as I'm in this process of trying to decide what God has for my life as a sophomore, the second semester of my sophomore year, I almost couldn't come back because I couldn't get the finances worked out. So I began taking my steps towards going home to Grand Rapids, Michigan and finding a job. Nothing worked out. But then the door reopened at Olivet. And when I went back to Olivet, in that semester, God called me to ministry. In that semester, he had given me a resident assistant position for my junior and senior year that took care of finances. In that semester, I met a girl named Renee. If I had not gone back, if I had stayed home saying, I'm sure just because the job hasn't opened that there's got to be something, I would have missed what he had. But I tried to be obedient. I tried to follow. There are faith steps that we've got to go through. The third thing we see is God's voice. In verses 7 through 11, God is talking to Samuel and just saying, not him, not him, not him. Okay, this is the one. In that process, he's listening for God. He's trying to find the direction. And he says, is this all your sons? He asked a good question. You would think they're all there. I mean, this is the priest coming. But he thought, I need to ask that question. One of my favorite shows is The Voice. This vocal competition is unique in that all of the artists sit and listen to people auditioning behind them. They're not looking at physical appearances. They're listening for things that tell them whether they can coach or develop this person to be a winner of this competition. The artists become careful listeners, and you see them listening intently for things that they hear in the people behind them that are singing. We need to get that careful listening ear more developed in our lives, no matter where we're at, where we can hear or are trying to hear a little bit more what God's calling us to do. His voice can be weak if we are not in tune with listening for it. There have been times in my life where his voice was clear. There were times in my life where I kind of think I know what he's saying, because I start taking the reins, it gets quiet. Start giving the reins back, it becomes a little bit easier to hear. His voice will guide us step by step. During my years in student ministries, I remember very clearly God speaking to me one weekend in 1996. We had come for an interview to be youth pastors at Westside. And through prayer and belief, the church board said to Pastor Ron Blake, extend a call. I accepted the call, and I was sitting right down here about the 10th row on that Sunday morning when he's announcing this call. And I remember thinking, what are you doing? You got 60 kids in a youth group that you love to death, and there's no reason to leave them. And I thought, God, are you saying something to me? Or is it Satan trying to trip me up because I thought I've already prayed through this? We're going to go through those highs and those lows in listening for his voice, where sometimes it's going to be clear, and then sometimes we're going to have doubts. And in the midst of the doubts, I wasn't going to stand up and say, change my mind, all right? I wasn't going to do that. I said, I believe this is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm going to do it. It was taking that next step. So, in 2012, God came to me in a different way on a Wednesday night with youth group, was all done, and he just said, enjoy your time because it's limited. What? What are you talking about? I have something else for you. And that's all. No direction, just trust me. Hear my voice. You've been faithful, but I have something else. And one of the biggest struggles that we face in our walk with God is when he says, I have something else, and he doesn't tell you anything. And you go for months saying, you said you had something else. And we begin to try to figure those things out. And it had to be just his voice. That brings us to God's peace. Verses 12 and 13, Samuel comes to a point where it's like there's peace in his heart. This is the next king. I'm going to go back now and see what God does to move in the situation. So God's plan and his direction and his voice leads Samuel to God's peace. When we come through a faith journey and we're walking with God, he's got something new for us. He begins to reveal it. The thing that's tricky about this is trying to figure out his timing with our timing and how the world works and what we can and can't do with that. So I grew up as a kid, young kid, in the late 60s, and I remember seeing things on TV that were disturbing to me, even as a 6 or 7-year-old. I saw the political unrest. I saw Vietnam. I saw the racial issues on TV. It was on the news. I grew up in the suburbs of Detroit, and I had to worry about being bused. I didn't want to be bused somewhere else. I want to go to the school that I can walk to in 3 minutes. And I remember all these things that were happening in that time and the cry for peace that the world was trying to have. And as I was thinking about that and processing some of these things about God's peace in our lives, I came across this thought that peace is a state of mind more than the removal of turmoil. So with God's peace, everything isn't going to necessarily be smooth, and all the turmoil isn't going to be gone, but it's God's peace. And when we're in God's peace and in the center of doing those things that we feel He's called us to, whatever it might be, even when the little bumps come up, He's going to walk us through. So this is the gospel service. So there was an old song I was thinking about in preparing that I remember. I don't remember how far back. Tony might remember how far back this song goes, but it's called "There's Peace in the Midst of the Storm." And the verse goes like this: "There's peace in the midst of the storm, my storm-tossed life. There's an anchor, there's a rock to put my faith upon. Jesus rides in my vessel, so I'll feel no alarm. He gives me peace in the midst of the storm." In the midst of the things we don't understand in our lives, He's still there. He's still trying to guide and direct. When we trust in God's plan, His direction and voice, there's usually peace. It's the next step. When we walk with God, He gives us a peace. The thing that's interesting about this is sometimes He can give us peace, but He's given us no direction or no plan. Or sometimes He's given us a plan, but He hasn't given us His voice, and we begin to listen for it in that plan. Whatever it is, these elements aren't always in order. Sometimes God shares something with us, and we just kind of go, okay, and we wait. Hurry up and wait, God. Why am I waiting? Why can't you just tell me? Why can't you just show me? But see, that's how our world is. We are a Google search society, all right? I don't know if you know this or not. I was not the best Bible scholar. I mean, I heard all these stories as a child, and if there's a verse, it's like, I know that verse. Where's that verse at? Google it. Put 3 words in, and you got the verse. That's one thing nice about some of those things. It's like, that's where that text is. But we want fast answers. God created in 6 days, and then He rested. But those days were not like our days. God walks through the journey with us. One of the times that I did hear His peace, feel His peace, was in 1995. It was Christmas. We were in Sterling, Illinois. And I remember being there and thinking at our home, and all of a sudden God's peace just came on me and said, "Trust me." Like, whenever God does that, you start saying, "What do you mean trust you now? What's going on?" And I had this impression that He just said, "You won't be here next Christmas in this home." Okay, that's something to rest on for Christmas. You know, you begin to process and, well, where are you going with this? And then God just said, "Just trust me." A year later, we were here. God wants to bring peace. He wants to speak. He wants to direct. And when I talked about those who are empty nesters, and I talk about those who are near retirement, I'm getting towards that side. I'm starting to understand that it is sometimes almost as hard to trust God for the next step now as it was when I didn't really know a lot. And it was easy to say, okay, I'll follow you, God. It was easier to trust then. So I'm going to have to learn how to re-trust Him, even at this point in my life. So today, God is speaking to each and every one of us in a different way. We're all at a different point in our lives. And because of that, He says again, I'm calling. I want you to take a look at this video clip with me, and then we're going to close in prayer. Where am I supposed to be? What am I supposed to do? God's going to direct us.
I draw these little dots to remind me where I am in relationship to everything else. Like a map in a mall that reads, "You are here." But what do I do when life isn't as clear? When I'm not sure where I am? When the glass isn't so clean? When the dots are erased and I'm sitting with this question: what is my calling? I know it has something to do with my desires and my if they're from me or from God. So I try to start at the beginning. I start with my story. If I can begin to understand my story, maybe I can understand my calling. To tell you the truth, I am terrified of making the wrong choice. What if I marry the wrong person? What if I buy the wrong house? What if I take the wrong job? What if I choose the wrong path? Sometimes, trying to uncover my story and discern what it is that makes my heart come alive, it feels like I'm erasing everything that I've ever known. And still, I'm left with these really basic questions. Do I go here or here? Then I wonder, is my calling just about where I go or even what I do? If my calling is more about my story and who I'm supposed to be, then does it even matter? And then I cry out, speak to my heart. Tell me, please. And then I am left with what feels like a complete mess. And then it starts to become a little more clear. What if my calling is not just about where I go or what I do? What if my calling is about who I am and who I am becoming?
Heavenly Father, today, we each have a story. You've walked with some of us for a short time and maybe some of us for a long time. But you created us and you know us. Who better should we rely on for the next steps in our lives? We thank you for the fact that we can be reminded that there is a process and there are steps. And sometimes the longer we wait, you just develop our faith all the more. I thank you for each one today and of how you've worked in their lives to this point and how you have more plans for them. You have more things you'd like to walk them through. Give them the strength today to know that you are in control. We give you praise this Lord's Day. We thank you for your presence in this place. Go with us from this time and remember to search you and seek you in maybe some new ways this week. and ask you for what you have for us in your name. Amen. You're dismissed.
Saw a sea that could not be hid. Oh, yes, he did. John caught a glimpse of the golden throne. Go right on around the throne. We saw the crystal sea. What will it be? I want to go to that city he saw, New Jerusalem. Streets that